Dark storm clouds. The echo of iron boots on stone. A raven flies across a crimson sky. They were the blade of Rome. They were the terror of nations. They were men whose shadows stretched farther than empires. When they marched, the world held its breath. When they spoke, legions obeyed. And when they fought, rivers ran red. These were the generals Rome feared. And even Rome itself was not safe from their ambition. The camera pans across the ruins of the Colosseum. Voices of crowds echo faintly. Rome, the eternal city, marble shining in the sun, blood soaking the sands of its arenas, steel clashing in its endless wars. Here, generals were not mere soldiers. They were kings in armor, gods of war, walking among mortals. And tonight we begin with two names that defined fear itself. Thunder rumbles. The screen fades to a desert battlefield. Belisarius, the last great general of Rome. He fought in an age when the empire was crumbling, when its enemies circled like wolves. And yet, with only a fraction of the armies that once conquered the world, Belisarius struck like lightning. In Africa, he crushed the Vandals with such swiftness that whispers spread of witchcraft. In Italy, he broke the Goths, shattering kingdoms with cunning traps and sudden strikes. His army was small, but his mind unstoppable. His enemies called him a ghost. He appeared from nowhere, vanished into mist, leaving only ruin behind. But here lies the cruel irony. Rome's foes feared him, and Rome itself feared him even more. For emperors never trusted generals who became too powerful. Belisarius was loyal beyond measure, yet that loyalty was his curse. Suspicion poisoned the court. Jealous whispers followed him like shadows. And so, the man who saved Rome lived as an outcast within it, a ghost, not only to his enemies, but to the very empire he bled for. The sound of marching feet. The camera shifts to a dark forest, fog curling around broken trees. But centuries earlier, Rome faced a wound so deep it nearly broke its spirit forever. The Teutoburg Forest, a massacre so brutal, so complete, that even Augustus himself, the great emperor of Rome, tore his clothes in despair. 3 legions destroyed, 20,000 Roman soldiers butchered, the empire humiliated. The German tribes, led by a single man, Arminius, had defied the might of Rome. And Rome could not forget. Rome could not forgive. It was then that another general rose. Germanicus, the avenger. With fire in his heart and vengeance burning in his eyes, he marched into Germania. Every step he took was soaked in blood. Village burned. Tribes scattered. The earth itself shook under the thunder of his legions. He hunted Arminius through rivers, swamps, and endless forests. At the Weser River, their armies clashed in a storm of steel and screams. Germanicus did not capture his enemy, but he broke his spirit. He restored Rome's pride with rivers of blood. So terrible was his wrath that German mothers hushed their children with his name. Germanicus, the shadow that haunted their nights. And so, Rome's enemies learned a truth carved in fire. Rome's vengeance was eternal. Its memory was sharp as a sword. And when Rome struck back, the world bled. The music swells, the screen fades to black. One general fought like a ghost. The other burned like fire. Belisarius and Germanicus, 2 shadows of fear that stretched across centuries. But they were only the beginning. For soon would come lions, executioners, and butchers, men who would make even Rome itself tremble. Fade to black. A heartbeat echoes. And next, the execution arises. The screen opens on a burning horizon. The sound of distant screams. A rider gallops across fields of ash, carrying a bloodied Roman standard. They called him the executioner of Rome. Aurelian, a man born of the barracks, hardened by the dust of countless campaigns. When the empire bled, when enemies carved away its flesh, it was Aurelian who rose from the ranks. Not noble by birth, not favored by fortune, but chosen by war itself. Drums echo. A map of the fractured empire burns into view. The 3rd century. Rome was on its knees. Barbarian tribes stormed across the frontiers. Persians pressed from the east, and within, pretenders crowned themselves emperors in every province. The empire was crumbling. It needed not a ruler, but an executioner. Aurelian strides in a battle, his face lit by fire. An executioner he became. Against the Goths, he struck with merciless steel, cutting them down until their name became a whisper of terror. Against the Vandals, his fury was unmatched. But his greatest test was in the east. Zenobia, queen of Palmyra, a woman of iron will and piercing mind. Her armies had seized Egypt, Syria, and half the east, declaring independence from Rome. For Aurelian, this was not rebellion. It was blasphemy. Rome was eternal. Rome was indivisible. And so he marched. The scene shifts to the desert. Sandstorms. Roman soldiers marching beneath the scorching sun. At Emesa, Aurelian met Zenobia's legions. The battle raged like a storm of fire and steel. But the queen's armies broke before his iron will. Zenobia herself fled on a camel, racing for the Euphrates. But fate was cruel. She was captured, brought in chains before the Roman general she had defied. And Aurelian, the executioner, returned her to Rome, not as a queen, but as a trophy. Triumphal music swells. The camera pans across Rome's streets, filled with roaring crowds. Crowds cheered. Chains rattled. And Aurelian's shadow loomed across the empire. He crushed rebellions. He sealed the frontiers. He restored the world. One man, who saved an empire drowning in its own blood. The screen fades to the Colosseum. Roaring crowds. The echo of gladiators. But while Aurelian was feared for his ruthlessness, another general was remembered for his brilliance. A lion in the service of Augustus. Marcus Agrippa. Friend. Advisor. Commander. The man without whom Augustus would have been nothing. The sound of waves. Ships creaking in the sea. The clash of oars. Rome was at war with itself. The Republic shattered. Octavian faced Mark Antony and Cleopatra, a union of passion, power, and ambition. The fate of Rome would be decided not on land, but on the sea. And Agrippa was Rome's sword upon the waters. The Battle of Actium unfolds. Flames consume ships. Arrows rain down. At Actium, Agrippa commanded the fleet. The sea boiled with fire and blood. Antony's ships burned. Cleopatra fled. And in a single day, the dreams of Egypt and Antony turned to ash. Rome had won. And it was Agrippa who carved that victory with steel and flame. The scene shifts. The camera shows Roman aqueducts, roads, shining marble structures. But Agrippa was not only a warrior. He was a builder. Rome's aqueducts, its roads, its monuments, the eternal veins of the eternal city. Agrippa gave Rome not just survival, but greatness. And so, while Aurelian was the executioner who saved Rome with blood, Agrippa was the lion who gave Rome breath, strength, and glory. The music softens. The screen fades into shadows. But shadows never sleep long. For the empire that Aurelian saved and Agrippa built would once again tremble before men far darker. Lions would give way to wolves. Executioners would be forgotten. And soon, the butcher of Rome would rise. Fade to black. The faint sound of a heartbeat. A whisper, Caracalla. The screen opens on a moonlit street of Rome. A lone figure walks with guards. The sound of sandals striking stone echoes like a death march. The camera rises to reveal a cold face, Caracalla. They called him the Butcher of Rome, not because he fought only her enemies, but because he slaughtered his own. Caracalla, son of Septimius Severus, brother of Geta, emperor of Rome, and a man whose name dripped with blood. The camera cuts to a banquet hall. Torches flicker. Two brothers sit side by side, but their eyes are full of hatred. When their father died, the empire fell to two brothers, Caracalla and Geta. But Rome cannot be ruled by two lions in one den. Suspicion grew, plots twisted in shadows, and at last, blood spoke louder than brotherhood. Caracalla lured Geta into their mother's arms, promising peace. But as Geta embraced her, soldiers burst in. Steel flashed. Geta was cut down, bleeding out in his mother's lap. A brother's betrayal. A mother's scream. The Empire's horror. The music deepens. Crowd scream. The camera shows Roman streets running with blood. But this was only the beginning. Caracalla's wrath spread through the city like wildfire. Thousands were executed. Friends of Geta hunted down. Even whispers of disloyalty silenced with steel. Fear became his crown. Terror, his throne. And yet, the butcher was not only cruel. He was cunning. The scene shifts to a battlefield. Soldiers raise standards. Caracalla rides before them, armor gleaming in the sun. He gave citizenship to every free man in the empire, not from generosity, but from greed. For with citizenship came taxes, and with taxes came gold, enough to feed his endless wars. He marched east, seeking glory against Parthia. But fate would not grant him the triumph he craved. In 217, on the road to Carrhae, as he relieved himself by the roadside, one of his own soldiers cut him down. The butcher died not with a roar, but with a gasp, a tyrant undone by his own cruelty. The camera fades from the blood-soaked corpse of Caracalla to the high walls of Rome. The sound of horns blares. A storm approaches. Yet not all Rome's generals bathed in the blood of their own people. Some stood as shields, defenders when the empire itself trembled. Flavius Stilicho, the last great Roman shield. The music shifts. The thunder of marching barbarians shakes the earth. Shadows move across the horizon. The 4th century. Rome was crumbling. The West rotted from within, poisoned by corruption, weakened by decay. But from the north came a storm unlike any before. The Goths, led by Alaric, a man whose fury would one day break into Rome itself. And against him stood Stilicho, half Roman, half barbarian, distrusted by the Senate. But in battle, a lion, the clash of steel. The battlefield erupts with screams and thunder. At the Battle of Pollentia, Stilicho struck. On Easter Sunday, when the Goths least expected it, his legions stormed their camp. The fighting was savage. Horses trampled men into the mud. Steel carved flesh. Blood ran like rivers. But Stilicho triumphed. He drove back the storm. Rome breathed again. The scene shifts to Ravenna. A candle flickers. Senators whisper in dark chambers. Yet what Rome fears most is not always her enemies, but her saviors. Whispers grew. Jealous rivals poisoned the emperor's ear. And Stilicho, the shield of Rome, was branded a traitor. In 408 he was seized, dragged from sanctuary, and executed like a common criminal. The legions wept. The Goths rejoiced. And Rome stripped itself of its last great defender. 2 years later, Alaric entered Rome itself. The eternal city was plundered. Stilicho's ghost must have watched in silence as the empire paid the price for killing its own shield. The music falls to a whisper. The screen fades to black. A voice cuts through the silence. One man butchered Rome. Another bled to defend her. But soon, there would come a general whose name thundered across the east. A hammer against Persia. A savior carved in fire. Heraclius. The screen opens on a battlefield bathed in fire. Banners torn. Corpses litter the ground. A lone figure kneels before a cross, whispering a prayer. His name, Heraclius. The east was burning. The Persian Empire, old and unyielding, had carved deep into Rome's flesh. Syria, Palestine, even Jerusalem itself, seized, defiled, its holy relics carried away in triumph. Rome had faced many enemies before, but this was different. The heart of faith itself had been ripped from the empire's chest, and men whispered, "Rome is dying." The sound of distant bells, a shadowed palace. Heraclius, weary, yet unbroken, rises from his throne. But into the ashes rose a man, Heraclius, a general not born of luxury, but of fire. When emperors cowered behind walls, he marched. When armies faltered, he led from the front. He was not merely fighting for land. He was fighting for the soul of Rome. The camera shifts to icy mountains. Soldiers trudge through snow, breath steaming in the cold. Against Persia, he struck where none expected. through frozen passes, through winter storms. He led his men not as a distant emperor, but as a brother in arms. And in 627, at Nineveh, his chance came. The Persians waited proud, countless in number. But Heraclius unleashed fury. His soldiers fought like lions. Steel clashed in the bitter snow. And there, in single combat, Heraclius himself cut down the Persian general, Razates. The army broke. The Persians fled, and the cross of Christ was restored to Jerusalem. Triumphant music swells. The camera shows Heraclius riding through cheering crowds, the relic of the true cross shining in the sun. For a moment, Rome breathed again. Faith restored. The East reclaimed. Heraclius, savior, hammer, emperor. But fate is cruel. Even as Persia burned, a new storm gathered beyond the sands. The Arabs, a faith young and unstoppable, blazing like fire across deserts. And Rome, weary from victory, would soon face a storm no general could truly contain. The screen fades slowly into black. A single flame flickers. Then suddenly, cannon fire shatters the silence. The year is 1453. Centuries passed. Emperors came and went. But one name still lingers. Constantine 11 Palaiologos, the last emperor, the last general of Rome. The camera shows Constantinople, its walls towering above the sea, bathed in the glow of a dying sun. The empire was no longer the vast dominion of Augustus, no longer the iron empire of Trajan. What remained was a city, a jewel of faith and history, Constantinople. But before its gates stood an enemy unlike any before. The Ottomans, led by Mehmed II, the Conqueror, a king barely 21, commanding cannons that roared like thunder. Explosions, cannons fire, walls tremble, dust fills the air. The ground shakes. For weeks, the earth quaked beneath Ottoman fire. The walls that had stood for 1,000 years began to crack. Inside the city, fear spread. But Constantine did not flee. He did not cower. He became what Rome had always demanded of her sons, a soldier. The music deepens. Constantine rides along the walls, rallying his men. His voice echoes. He fought not as an emperor on a throne, but as a warrior in armor. Day and night, he stood beside his men, patching the walls with his own hands, wielding his sword in the breaches. And when the final assault came, he chose death over surrender. The camera shows the final charge. Constantine throwing away his purple cloak, fighting shoulder to shoulder with his men. A storm of Ottomans breaks through. They say he cast aside his imperial regalia, that he fought as a common soldier, that his body was never found. Did he die in the crush of battle? Did he vanish in a legend? Or does the soul of Rome still march with his ghost? The music swells to a tragic crescendo. Flames engulf the city. The cross of Hagia Sophia falls. But the narration whispers on. And so, the story ends not with triumph, but with fire. From Heraclius, who restored the cross, to Constantine 11, who died with it, Rome's generals lived and died in blood, steel, and faith. Some were butchers, some were shields, some were saviors, but all of them were feared. And in the end, perhaps that is Rome's eternal legacy. Not marble, not empire, but men who carved history with their swords. Fade to black, the sound of a heartbeat, then silence. The screen fades into silence. Ruins of Rome appear under the setting sun. Crumbled marble, broken statues, and empty streets echo with ghosts of the past. From the dust of the Forum to the ashes of Constantinople, the story of Rome's most feared generals is not just a tale of battles. It is a mirror of power itself. Men who rose from nothing, men who defied kings, men who shattered empires, and men who bled, betrayed, and burned for glory. The music swells slowly, deep and haunting. The faces of generals flash across the screen one by one. Marius, Sulla, Caesar, Caracalla, Stilicho, Heraclius, Constantine 11. Each of them carried Rome upon their shoulders. Each of them shaped history with their swords. But with every triumph came tragedy. With every victory came betrayal. With every crown of laurel came rivers of blood. Was it glory they sought, or immortality, or was it simply fear, the oldest weapon of all? The camera shifts to shadows of soldiers marching through mist, fading into nothingness. Marius built the armies that made Rome unstoppable, yet died hated. Sulla crushed his enemies with fire, but left behind a republic poisoned by terror. Caesar crossed the Rubicon, and with one step, killed the republic forever. Caracalla drowned Rome in blood and died alone, a knife in his back. Stilicho defended Rome when none else would, and was murdered by the very city he saved. Heraclius restored the cross to Jerusalem, only to see a new faith sweep away the world he knew. And Constantine XI, the last emperor, the last Roman, who vanished in the smoke of his city's fall. The screen lingers on the Hagia Sophia, its domes fading into shadow. So what is Rome's legacy? Is it marble columns? Broken statues? Dust and ruin? Or is it something more? The fear these men carried into battle, the awe they commanded, the terror they left behind. For empires crumble, marble falls, but fear endures. The music rises to a cinematic crescendo. A final montage, the eagle of Rome, bloodied swords, burning cities, marching legions. Rome was not eternal, but the men who were feared in her name, they carved eternity into history. And perhaps that is why we still speak their names. Because in the end, Rome's greatest weapon was not her legions. It was the men who made the world tremble. The screen fades to black. A final whisper, the 10 most feared generals of Rome. Not gods, not saints, but men. Men who became legend.